Hello my friends, thank you for joining me. Today I will be going over the top 10 misconceptions about homeschooling and debunking all of them. This video would be great if you either have a negative view of homeschooling or you are ignorant on the subject and simply have heard or repeated what you have experienced from others. I will also ask you to please comment down below what your views of homeschooling are before this video, what they are after this video, or any answers to any questions I might have, or any questions of your own. And if there are enough questions, I will either respond to them in a comment, or I will just do a whole separate video answering them. Now let's get into it. Before we even discuss the top 10 misconceptions, I should probably go over first my experience with homeschooling. First off, I was homeschooled all my life from K to 12th grade, and my parents have sacrificed much to do it. You see, it started with about a year or so, probably even 6 months, before I was even going to go into my first public school setting in the first grade. What happened was I was living in LA, Los Angeles, and the school I was going to go to, that I've been forced to go to, they had an incident where I believe a 5-year-old stabbed a 6-year-old with a knife this semester before. So now they had metal detectors, and every time you go to class, they had to scan you to make sure you weren't carrying any kind of weapons. Apparently it had happened enough where they needed to do that, and my parents were like, no. So they decided to homeschool me. I believe they were trying to consider if they could send me to another school, but in California, at least at that time, and it's probably worse now, in California you had to go to the school that your zip code was part of. You could not switch. So instead they decided to homeschool me. That was interesting because homeschooling in LA, California is frowned upon. Apparently they said they had been harassed before, which is part of the reason why we were part of the HSLDA, which is basically a lawyer group that helps homeschooled families. Now, skipping to my to after I was done with the 12th grade, I took my SATs and I scored way higher than average on my SATs, and this is regardless of race. I scored way higher than the white average, and my score was still significantly higher than the Asian average. However, when it came to finding a college, that did not matter because colleges did not consider the material I was taught to be accredited, as they say, which forced me to go to community college towards my what's it called? AS, my associates in science, if I can speak properly today. And of course, this is as far as I will go on my college journey. I don't really like to get into it because people can, weird people can track me down. So I could either be, for all you know, I could either be going towards my AS right now, or I could be going towards my doctorate. Or my master's or whatever, but that really is not anyone's concern at the moment. I would do an update video, provided my channel is around long enough to go over my doctorate. And I would hope to have my doctorate for a while before I do that. But enough about me, let's get into these misconceptions. Number 10. Homeschooling and remote learning are the same thing. Now I put this here at the bottom because this is a rather new objection. When it came to remote learning, I had not even heard about that till the COVID pandemic hit. But because of this, I heard a lot of people say, well, they don't really like the idea of homeschooling because it clearly doesn't work. And they would point to what remote learning is. And I think it's important for everyone to know that remote learning and homeschooling are vastly different. Here are the main differences. Remote learning is done by a school district, usually on a streaming device such as Zoom or Skype. Generally, it's very structured, very similar to regular school, and a lot of the disadvantages of public school plus some other ones. For instance, you still have the same number of classmates, the only difference is that you are not in the same proximity. You have a teacher who's trying to communicate with you, but it's going to be much harder because some students might have limiting devices, and if the material that the school uses is not very good for the students, it's still the exact same material, so very little changes. It's just that you're given a lot more obstacles. Homeschooling, on the other hand, is a lot different. First off, the material is selected by the parents, or parents, as I put. And it's also taught by the parents or a private tutor. There's also not very strict. Like, for instance, I have had it where as soon as I get up early in the morning, I'm doing my schoolwork, or if I had something I needed to do, I can do it in the afternoon or at night. In fact, that's what I would normally do back when I was homeschooled. I would, me and my dad would fish early in the morning, and then when I got back, we would do our schoolwork. So, the homeschooling and remote learning are two very different. As we will see later on in this thing, later on in this video, that there's also massive advantages towards being homeschooling versus remote learning. While remote learning has serious challenges which kids have trouble adapting to, as we have seen, homeschooling does not share these obtrusions. And again, as I've explained, the person is you're one-on-one with your teacher, which would be your parent or tutor. With remote learning, you are still not one-on-one, and if you fall behind, the teacher has no choice but to continue on, even if you fall behind. So, again, that's one misconception down. If you think remote learning and homeschooling are the same, I would advise you to drop that because they could not be more different. There we go. Number 9, homeschooling is only for the privileged. I had heard this before, and I've heard this a number of times on Twitter. The argument goes, homeschooling is only good if you're like a white, rich family. If you are any other type of family, you're not going to be homeschool because there's no money or time to do it. Well, first off, that actually is not true. I, for instance, am living proof. My father we were one income family because my mother didn't work and up to a certain point couldn't work, and I'll explain in a minute. But basically, we were living in a $49,000 per year salary in Los Angeles, people. I want you to grasp that. We were $49,000 in Los Angeles. If states did their poverty line properly, we would be considered under the poverty line. So, and to make matters worse, my mom couldn't work up to a certain point. When we moved, she injured her arm, which rendered her disabled. But for reasons I'm not even going to get into, at least not in this video, we didn't fall under a certain racial quota, so mom could not get a disability, and to this day still can't get a disability. But that's really a story for another video. But anyway, clearly it's not for the privileged. And in fact, recently minorities, such as African Americans, are seeing a big increase in homeschooling and are now overrepresented in homeschooling statistics. For those of you who may not remember math, I think statistics or algebra, when you're overrepresented, it means, if I can speak properly, it means that a higher percentage than the percentage you represent are participating. Like, for instance, I read somewhere that I think in some studies it shows that 18% of homeschoolers are African Americans, but African Americans are 12% of the of America, which means they are overrepresented, and they are more likely, on average, to homeschool than whites. At least that's to my understanding. And here's the source for that statistic. All of the sources that I will be sharing with you can be found in the description. Number 8, homeschooling is racist. I've heard this before. The argument goes several ways, like only whites can homeschool because they're only allowed to, or homeschooling teaches white supremacy or whatever, or, there's just numerous. Like, it seems like only whites homeschool, so it's racist, or even my personal favorite, which is generally the most common, whites take their, homeschool their kids, take them out of minority or schools that have a large persons of color representative. First off, that's bogus. There's absolutely no way to prove. In fact, there's no way to prove that is the motivating reason. In fact, polls have shown that it's not the motivating reason. But like what I had shown earlier, minorities are starting to exponentially increase their participation in homeschooling. I believe only Asians are the only minorities to be underrepresented in homeschooling. And you can find the source for that claim here, and the graph I'm going to use for the next page will be here. As we have seen, since the pandemic, from April 2020 to June 2021, school choice, which indeed includes homeschooling, has shown significant support in recent times. In fact, if you know polling data at all, a 10% increase in total support is massive. That is catastrophically huge. And as you can see, it doesn't matter your politics, your environment, or your age, or race. Every measurable demographic has seen an increase in school support choice. Now, why is that? Well, according to this particular poll, a lot of it is because they've gone sour on the teachers. Believe it or not, while the media is trying to say teachers and teacher unions are heroes, regular people don't see them like that. In fact, I would consider them villains, because CDC has said numerous times that that children go back to school, and the teachers union have taken their sweet time to open it back up, and even then they're only halfway open. So if you think, like, quite frankly, I don't want to push any buttons, but if you think that teachers or teacher unions are heroes, consider yourself in the minority. Number 7, homeschooling is not a popular opinion. I heard this before, saying that why would we encourage homeschooling when it is not popular? Well, first off, this is a fallacy. This is the appeal to popularity, basically saying that it is right or wrong because it is popular. Part of the reason it's not popular is because the government does not like the idea of them not being able to control what their students teach, and we will get into that later. And polls, like I just showed earlier, have constantly showed that school choice has been popular and continues to be so. It's not like school choice had been popular, or had not been popular, all of a sudden it is. It had been popular for a while. In fact, numerous candidates who shouldn't have won certain districts, or at least shouldn't have won certain demographics, have seen major increases because of school choice. In Florida, I read somewhere that Governor DeSantis did significantly better among black women because he was school choice. But I could not find data for that. So, because the person who tweeted had his Twitter blocked, I believe. So we'll have to see what happens there. But the moral of the story is there's not a good argument, because it is the argument of popularity. Number 6, the material is biased. I have heard people tell me that we can't homeschool because the material that is used in homeschooling is too biased, whether it be too religious, or teach creationism, or maybe teach that America isn't so bad, whatever. The argument is that material is biased. Well, first off, it's worth mentioning that what is and isn't biased can very well be determined by who defines bias, as there is no empirical evidence that the average homeschool curriculum is any more biased than any public school curriculum. It just basically goes down to the argument of the government saying, well, we arbitrarily claim what is and isn't biased. As we will see later, this does not really matter much, as the performance by the students is not hampered. In fact, the evidence shows that homeschool students actually do better outside of school, not worse. And we'll see that in a minute. But even, let's just say for the sake of argument, that most homeschooling materials are biased. Even if the average material was inherently biased, what exactly is the sin? If the students are doing better anyway, which is an objective fact, what difference would it make in any way, shape, or form? This is simply a red herring to either distract from the argument that that the government, or people in general, want the government to control their kids, or the parents just simply want to feel important by saying that, public school, let's fight for public school, blah 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 blah. The moral of the story is that this objection does not even matter because it's a red herring. Number 5. Studies in favor of homeschooling is unreliable. The argument goes that, well, you can't give me stats or numbers that show homeschooling is reliable, because the studies that give those numbers are either biased, unsourced, or unreliable. Well, the short answer is that's incorrect. In fact, they have such high averages because of numerous studies over decades that it would be impossible to even claim that studies are unreliable. In fact, many of the objections I have read, or people have shared, come from the study at Harvard by Elizabeth Bartholet, I believe it's pronounced. And this study that was published was atrocious. First of all, I can go into a separate video detailing more of detailing the problems in this particular study if the popular demand says I need to. But let's just say, in short, the study is unreliable and should be thrown out by its own standards. As it says, one of the criteria it says is that homeschooling studies completely ignore results that go against their narrative. But the problem is that as you read its own study, it does the exact same thing. It doesn't even address the positive studies for homeschooling. It just simply expresses its own negatives, which are not sourced very well. So by its own standard, it needs to be thrown out. There are also other issues, like for instance, it says most homeschooling material is religious based, but they never really go into why it's a problem. Their only evidence is that, well, we're Harvard, so we say it's bad. They also go into how homeschooling kids can be abused, but it's like yes, they can, and that's awful, but so can public school. So what's your point? By your own logic, we should get rid of public schools as well. Let's just say it is a paper that if I were to submit to my English class when I was taking it, I would have gotten a D at best. Like, it is so bad. But here's a good counter article, and I will leave the original article and the counter article both in the description below. But again, please let me know in the comments. If you guys are interested in seeing me tear apart that paper, let me know. It really is bad. Like, you could probably do it on your own, but yeah, it's so bad. Let's move on. Number 4, homeschooling is ripe with abuse. Kind of like what the paper was saying. The argument goes, the big argument goes, we can't allow homeschooling to be so common because it allows parents to keep their kids at home so they can abuse them longer. First off, Harvard tries to prove it, but does not even bother trying to prove this assertion. They act like abuse does not happen in public schools. Basically, they say that abuse happens in homeschooling, therefore we need to abandon homeschooling. Keep in mind, this paper also said that the government owns your kids, not you. So remember what they're coming from. And it's worth mentioning that by its own standards, we should close down public schools as well. The argument also adds that abusers want to keep their kids at home, but this does not make sense when scrutinized. Keep in mind, if a parent abuses a child, the parent clearly does not care about the child. So why on earth would they want that? Why on earth would a parent want that child at the home 24/7 where they have to teach them things? That does not make any sense whatsoever. And clearly it doesn't, because most kids are still in public school. Most kids who are abused are in public school. And outside of domestic abuse, public schools are clearly a problem with things like bullying and depression, which is not an epidemic problem in homeschooling. This will be touched upon in a later misconception. Misconception number 3. Homeschooling takes away money from public schools, or it is selfish. Here's how the argument basically goes. We can't allow homeschooling to get popular because it takes away money from public schools, and that is selfish. If there's not enough money, the kids cannot learn properly. Now, I don't know how it is in Europe, but here in America, the basic structure, although I think the details around it is a little different between county and states, but the basic structure is each school gets federal and state money depending on how many students they host. So if many students leave a district or leave a school, then the school loses money. I believe some schools it's based on how many kids attend, and some schools based on how many people live in the district. But basically, the entire argument from progressives specifically is we need to put more money into the schools to get our students better, to get our students smarter and do better in classes. The problem is it doesn't take very much at all to disprove that. First off, it is not selfish if the students do better in college and standardized tests, which we will prove in a minute. In fact, if that is true, then I would say it is selfish to force them to go to public schools, or force parents to send their kids to public schools and not give them a choice. However, it is also selfish if money does not equal better performance, as we have seen in 2 areas. First off, when you compare school districts directly, it shows that more money does not automatically mean better schools, as this sourced by the Michigan Capital Confidential, if I can speak properly, it shows that Detroit is one of the top 10 highest, has one of the top 10 highest funding numbers, but one of the bottom 10 in actual academic performances. So this clearly shows that more money does not equal better performance. And probably the one to nail the coffin is comparing homeschooling to public school money makes the problem worse. And here's the graph to show it. From this source, which again will be in the description below, homeschooling costs around $600 per student versus public schools, which costs almost $12,000 per student. My bad. And it's like, clearly money does not equal better performance. And keep in mind, the homeschool money is paid directly from the parents, as opposed to public school, which is paid directly from taxes. Alright, now of course none of this means anything if the students do better. And I know what some of you are thinking, well, you haven't improved the students do better. Well, here we go. Number 2. This misconception number 2. Homeschoolers don't do as well on standardized tests as college as public school kids. The argument goes, well, homeschooling is useless because you're taught, that the Bible is, that the Bible is the great word, America's great, whatever. So none of that matters if the homeschool students don't even do well in college. Well, this is patently false. Numerous sources showed the contrary of this opinion, and the opposing evidence provided by Harvard is an exception and can be disregarded by its own standards. Let's get into evidence. According to this, I probably should have made this page a little better, but this website can be seen in the description, as is an aggregation of sources. The public schools, the average is going to be 50 percentile, which makes sense because that is the average for standardized tests. Homeschooling, on average, can score within the 65 to 80% percentile. That is a significant increase if you know what the percentile is. For those of you who may not remember, or if you're public educated, I joke. A percentile means, if you're an 80 percentile, means that you are above 80% of the people who take the tests. 50% means you're above 50 and you're below 50. That's the idea. Public schools will score 72 points fewer on SATs than homeschooling students, who score 72 points more on SATs. Now this is I think these are according to 2019. So unless the SATs change in 2020 or 2021, that's how you can do it. 72 points actually is pretty significant. On the ACTs, public school students score around 21 points, while the homeschool students score around 22.8 points, nearly 23 points. And on ACTs, I believe that's pretty significant. And the graduation rate, I believe this is college graduation, but it could be high school. I think it's college. The college graduation rate, I believe, for bachelors is 57%, while for homeschools it is 2/3, 66.7%. The data clearly shows from decades that homeschoolers simply do better in outside of their school, whether it be standardized tests or college, than public school students. And the reason for that is quite simple. When you're homeschooled, regardless if your teacher, whether it be your parent or a tutor, is quote-unquote certified to teach you, you still get that one-on-one experience that is so valuable. Not to mention, you're more excited to do it. I read somewhere that now I didn't include it because I don't think it was I don't think it was a very reliable study, but I read somewhere that the average public school day length is about 8 hours, while it takes the average homeschool about 3 hours to do their schoolwork. And that sounds about right. I remember taking about 3 hours to do my work. And now we get to number 1, the biggest misconception that I hear. Like half the time somebody's complaining about homeschooling, this is what I hear. Here we go. Number 1, homeschool kids are not properly socialized. The objection goes quite simply like this. Homeschool can harm kids because they don't get any socialization. They're not properly socialized. Well, first I'm going to give you the data, and then I'm going to give you my personal experience with socialization. As mine probably isn't the best, isn't at first the best case scenario, but it does get a lot better. But first, here we go. Who decides what proper socialization is? There is no intangible way to measure socialization, as it is entirely dependent on who defines the subject. Like, what do you define good socialization is? I almost guarantee you that My definition is different, your friend's definition is different, the random Joe Blow who walks down the street's definition is different, and your congressman's definition is different. So with that, who decides what good socialization is? I would say there is no good way to do it because it's not an empirical science. Now, when studying socialization, now there is a somewhat decent way to measure it. I guess it would be like interactions. And that's what author Patrick Faringa has shown when working on a book. And he has shown not only are homeschooled kids perhaps better socialized, but also avoid issues like bullying and self-harm. In fact, this source down here, it shows that homeschool kids are much less likely to be bullied, much less likely to self-harm themselves, much less likely to fall into depression, much less likely to commit suicide, and much less likely to significantly harm someone else. But yeah, it's like if you the odds are if you have a somewhat negative approval of homeschooling, the odds are it probably is because you think we are not socialized. Now here is my experience. Now at first it wasn't so great because we were in LA County and we were constantly harassed. So it is true that my parents did kind of shelter us, because if we were caught outside without being in school, we would be harassed. So that is why I didn't, at least in LA, that is why I didn't really interact with too many people outside my family. However, once I got out of LA, whether it be in St. Louis or Chicago, and while I did interact with a lot more people, both my age and much older than me. In fact, the ones much older than me probably helped me become who I am today. When I was living in Chicago, me and my dad would fish a lot more often, and we would go to a bait shop in the middle of nowhere with our friends, and they were significantly older than my dad, let alone me. And we would interact with them very freely, and it was a very good learning experience when it came to socialization. Of course, that doesn't mean I'm still not shy or anything, but the funny part is, I've even seen somebody say that it makes homeschool kids shy, but homeschooling makes kids shy. But what exactly is the sin with being shy? It just means that you're meek or humble. And I want to end today with probably a very offensive but pretty ironic quote about homeschooling from what was her name? I think Katie Rich, I believe, who is or was the writer of Saturday Night Live. I don't watch Saturday Night Live, so I'm not even going to pretend to know if she's there or not. But here we go. I would recommend a little bit of a trigger warning, per se, because she mentioned something that kind of bothers people, which I understand. So I'm just letting you know that this could bother some people. I'm just letting you know right now. So here we go. Ready? Alright. She tweets, Barron Trump will be this country's first homeschooled shooter. Now, if you're homeschooled, can you imagine this being pretty offensive? Like, just because, like, why would you mention he's the first homeschooled shooter? What difference does that make? That's pretty offensive. However, it's pretty ironic. You see, if this lady has a problem homeschooling, why does she tweet first homeschooled shooter? Why not one of many homeschooled shooters? You see, there's really at the end of the day, there's really no reason to be negative of homeschooling. If you're negative of homeschooling, quite frankly, the odds are you either want the government to own the kids, or you want to feel good about yourself by proclaiming that public school is, better homeschooling, and we need to fight to make sure it keeps the funding. Because if we remove funding from public schools, it has to beg a question, well, if money does not equal better schooling, what else does money not equal? What else does more money not equal? Because it's a house of cards. If you remove the perception that more public funding makes things better, then all of a sudden, if you're a big government or progressive, it falls down completely. I don't want to offend or upset any of my viewers, but I have to be frank. There's no real reason for you not to like homeschooling. Now, of course, I know that not everyone can homeschool, and that's fine. It's not for everyone. However, it should not be discouraged, and actually should be encouraged. Now, how can we fix it? Two best ways to do that. We should either make homeschooling parents or single parents tax exempt, or fund homeschooling like we do public schools. Because as the evidence has shown, homeschooling simply makes kids better, and I think the way to a better society is not to force homeschooling, but to encourage it and allow it. So that is all I have to say for this video. Thank you all very much for watching. Keep the comment section cordial, and God bless.